The heavy iron gates of the billionaire's estate creaked open, and one by one, luxury cars rolled in, their polished bodies reflecting the cold gray sky. Inside, the mansion stood tall and intimidating, its windows like watchful eyes over the arriving guests. It was not just a house. It was a fortress of secrets, built brick by brick on power, ambition, and a fortune that had changed the lives of everyone connected to it. Inside the grand hall, the atmosphere was suffocating. A long table stretched under a glittering chandelier, where family members had taken their places. Some sat upright, their expressions composed, hiding their greed beneath polite smiles. Others whispered among themselves, their eyes darting, already imagining the riches that were about to be handed down. The air buzzed with unspoken competition. Everyone knew that this gathering was not about mourning a man's death, but about securing their share of his empire. At the far end of the room, a massive portrait of the billionaire loomed over them. His stern eyes seemed to follow every movement, as if he were still present, still in control. His presence was everywhere, in the golden frames, the marble floors, and the silence that weighed on the room. The eldest son, Richard, sat closest to the head of the table, chest puffed with self-importance. He had always believed he was the rightful heir, the one destined to inherit the empire. Beside him, his younger sister Charlotte tapped her manicured fingers impatiently, rolling her eyes at her brother's smugness. On the other side of the room, distant cousins, uncles, and estranged relatives shifted uncomfortably, each wondering how much, if anything, they would receive. No one spoke of grief. No one shed a tear. Instead, conversation circled around money, stocks, properties, investments. It was as if the billionaire's life meant less than the fortune he left behind. Then, the room grew quiet as the family lawyer entered. His black leather briefcase swung at his side, the sound of his polished shoes echoing across the marble floor. He didn't greet them. He didn't smile. He simply walked to the head of the table, placed the briefcase down, and opened it with a sharp click. Every eye followed his hands, waiting. Richard leaned forward, his voice dripping with confidence. "Let's not waste time. Father made it very clear that everything belongs to me. The rest of you know your places." Charlotte shot him a glare. "Don't be so sure, Richard. Father had his own way of teaching lessons. You might be in for a surprise." The cousins exchanged nervous glances, whispering again. The tension was like a storm cloud ready to burst. The lawyer cleared his throat, silencing them all. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, as executor of your father's estate, I am here to read his final will and testament. But before I begin, you must understand something. What I hold here is not just a document of wealth. It is a reflection of his final thoughts, his final judgments, and his final truths." A shiver ran through the room. Some adjusted in their chairs. Others swallowed hard. For the first time that evening, a shadow of unease crossed their faces. Because deep down, every one of them knew. The billionaire never forgot betrayal, and he never forgave greed. And what he left behind in writing might not be the fortune they expected. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and unfolded the first document, the one everyone had been waiting for. His hands moved with precision, but his expression betrayed nothing. The family leaned in, anticipation building like a drumbeat inside the room. Richard smirked, already certain of the words that were about to echo across the hall. To him, this was merely a formality, a performance where he was the lead actor and everyone else just supporting roles. The lawyer began to read in a steady voice. "I, Edward Harrington, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The familiar words sent a ripple through the room. The official language of inheritance carried an air of ceremony, of legitimacy. Richard's chest swelled with pride. Charlotte rolled her eyes but leaned closer, unable to hide her curiosity. The cousins whispered again, some already making calculations in their heads. The lawyer continued. "To my beloved son Richard, I leave control of the Harrington Enterprises conglomerate, its assets, properties, and all holdings both domestic and international." Richard leaned back in his chair with a smug smile, basking in the moment as though the empire was already in his hands. He glanced at his relatives with a look of triumph. "As expected," he murmured. Charlotte's jaw tightened, but she forced a polite smile. The lawyer's voice filled the room again. "To my daughter Charlotte, I leave the Harrington family estates in France and Italy, along with their trusts and all attached accounts." Charlotte's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of satisfaction breaking through her controlled demeanor. Though she despised Richard's arrogance, this portion was significant. Castles, vineyards, lands that stretched beyond what most could imagine. Her fingers stopped tapping and she sat straighter, proud to have been remembered so generously. The lawyer moved on. To my nephews, nieces, and cousins, I leave specified sums as outlined in the following annex. Papers shuffled and relatives leaned forward, straining to see the details. Some nodded in relief, others frowned at what seemed to them a paltry share compared to the vast empire they had dreamed of. One whispered angrily, "Pennies compared to what he had." Another muttered, "At least it's something." The room buzzed with the restless sound of entitlement and disappointment. For a moment everything seemed as it should be. The billionaire's empire divided neatly, his heirs satisfied, his legacy preserved. Richard rose from his chair, already acting as though the company was his to command. "It's done then," he said confidently. "The will has spoken. Father knew I was the only one capable of carrying the empire forward." But the lawyer did not close the folder. He did not pack his briefcase. Instead, he raised his hand, silencing Richard's victory speech. His voice, calm and deliberate, cut through the air. "You are mistaken, Mr. Harrington. What I have read is only the official version of your father's will. What the family has long known, the document you all expected." The room fell silent. Richard's smirk faltered. Charlotte narrowed her eyes. The cousins exchanged puzzled glances. The lawyer's hand rested on another sealed envelope within the briefcase, its edges worn, as though it had been handled many times in secrecy. "But," the lawyer continued slowly, his eyes sweeping across the table, "there exists another will, a hidden will, written by your father in his final days, and its contents are not what any of you imagine." The chandelier above seemed to flicker, shadows shifting across the faces of those gathered. Unease spread like wildfire. Richard's hands clenched the armrests of his chair. Charlotte's lips parted slightly, her earlier satisfaction melting into dread. The rest of the family leaned forward, their breaths held in disbelief. And for the first time since arriving, not one of them thought about wealth. They thought only of what secrets the billionaire might have carried to his grave, and how those secrets were about to rip apart everything they believed was theirs. The lawyer's hand hovered over the sealed envelope, its paper marked with the late billionaire's stamp. The room froze. Richard leaned forward, his voice sharp. "What is this?" Father already made his wishes clear. "The company is mine." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "Then why would he hide another will?" The cousins muttered nervously, torn between hope and fear. The lawyer's voice cut through the tension. "This document was locked in your father's private safe. It is a hidden will, written in his final days. It overrides everything read before." Richard slammed the table. "Impossible. He would never do this to me." But the lawyer calmly broke the seal. The tearing paper echoed like thunder. He unfolded the pages, glanced at the words, and began to read. "To my family I leave not only my fortune, but the truth you chose to ignore. This document is my final word, and it shall stand above all others." Gasps rippled around the hall. Charlotte gripped her chair, her knuckles white. The cousins whispered, some fearful, some eager. The lawyer continued, "I have watched betrayal, selfishness, and greed tear my blood apart. I refuse to let my life's work be destroyed by those unworthy of it. This is not a small amendment. This is a complete rewriting of my legacy." Richard's face burned with rage. Lies! This can't be legal. Yet deep inside, he knew his father's precision. Every detail would have been flawless. The lawyer's eyes lifted, his words deliberate. "This hidden will changes everything you thought you knew." The room went still. Charlotte whispered, almost to herself. Then, "Who inherits?" The lawyer tightened his grip on the parchment. The chandelier flickered overhead, shadows shifting across pale faces. A storm of anticipation filled the hall. They all knew what came next would shatter their world. The lawyer's voice trembled slightly as he turned to the final page of the hidden will. Every eye in the hall followed his movements with desperate hunger. Richard leaned forward, fists clenched, his jaw tight. Charlotte sat frozen, her usually sharp confidence replaced by fear of the unknown. The cousins leaned across the table, their whispers swelling until the lawyer raised his hand for silence. He cleared his throat and began. "Your father's final decision was not made lightly. He knew what it would mean for all of you gathered here, but he believed it necessary to protect his legacy from destruction." He paused. his eyes sweeping across the room, letting the words weigh heavily before continuing. In this hidden will, Edward Harrington leaves the majority of his empire, his wealth, and his fortune. Not to Richard, not to Charlotte, not to his extended family. The words hung in the air like a blade above their heads. Richard shot up from his chair, his voice exploding. "Impossible! He wouldn't dare betray his own blood." The lawyer ignored him, continuing firmly. "Instead, he leaves his empire to a single heir, someone he believed embodied loyalty, humility, and respect for what he built." Gasps erupted from every corner of the table. Charlotte's hand covered her mouth, her eyes wide in disbelief. Who could it be?" The lawyer glanced at the page once more, then spoke the name. The room erupted. It was not Richard. It was not Charlotte. It wasn't even another family member. It was someone the billionaire had trusted in silence for years, a long-time employee, the loyal housekeeper who had stood by his side since his youth, when the family often turned away. The hall exploded with outrage. "A servant," Richard roared, slamming his fists against the table. "This is a fraud!" One cousin shrieked. "He worked for us, not with us. He doesn't deserve a penny." Charlotte's voice cracked with fury. "Father has humiliated us all. Our blood replaced by a stranger." But the lawyer raised his voice, firm and unyielding. "Your father explained his reasons clearly. He saw greed in his children, betrayal in his relatives, and selfishness in those who carried his name. But in his servant he saw loyalty, humility, and sacrifice. While the rest of you fought over his wealth, this man cared for him, stood by him, and never asked for anything in return." The chandelier above flickered, shadows leaping across the walls as the family erupted into chaos. Some shouted threats, others wept, and Richard stormed toward the lawyer, his face twisted with rage. "I will not accept this. I am Harrington's son. That fortune is mine!" The lawyer stepped back, unshaken. "You may contest it, Richard, but know this. Your father left every legal safeguard in place. Witnesses signed this will. Documents back it. It cannot be undone." Silence slowly returned, heavy and suffocating. The portrait of the billionaire hung above them all, his stern gaze unchanging, as though watching their every reaction. Charlotte sank back into her chair, trembling, unable to process the humiliation. The cousins muttered in disbelief, already imagining their futures without the riches they had expected. And in that moment, every member of the family realized that Edward Harrington had delivered his final lesson. He had left behind not just a fortune, but a punishment. A reminder that greed had consequences, and that loyalty, no matter where it came from, was worth more than blood. The room was still vibrating with shock, but the lawyer wasn't finished. He adjusted his glasses, lifted the page again, and continued. "Your father wished me to reveal not just the heir, but the reasons behind his decision. He left instructions that the truth should be spoken aloud, here, in front of you all." The words cut through the silence like a blade. Charlotte stiffened, her heart racing. Richard sneered, but behind his anger was fear. Fear of what their father might have discovered. The lawyer's voice was calm, deliberate. "Edward Harrington was disappointed in many of you. He watched as greed poisoned his bloodline. He wrote here, in his own hand, that his greatest sorrow was not the fortune he would leave behind, but the family who would destroy it in their hunger." A cousin gasped, looking down in shame. Another shifted uncomfortably, knowing their father had borrowed money and never paid it back. The lawyer read on. "Richard, my son, you betrayed me with your arrogance. You treated the empire as your birthright, but never once earned the right to hold it. You gambled with the company's reputation, pursued profits without honor, and mocked the values I built this house upon." Richard's face burned crimson. "Lies! All lies!" But his trembling hands betrayed him. The lawyer turned his gaze to Charlotte. "And Charlotte, though you were intelligent and capable, you used your gifts for manipulation. You played your siblings against one another, not to protect the empire, but to elevate yourself. You were not the leader I hoped you would become." Charlotte lowered her head, her earlier fury dimmed to silent shame. The lawyer continued. "As for the rest of you, many of you came to me only with outstretched hands, asking for more. Cousins who disappeared until they needed money. Nephews who mocked me in public, then begged me in private. None of you stood by me when I was ill. None of you cared for me when I grew weak." His voice grew heavier with every word. "But there was one who did. One who remained by my side, not for wealth, not for power, but for loyalty. That is why I leave my empire to him. Because unlike you, he never abandoned me." The hall fell silent. The family sat paralyzed, their faces pale, their illusions shattered. The portrait of Edward Harrington loomed above them, his stern eyes unyielding. For the first time that night, the heirs realized this was not about inheritance at all. It was about judgment, and their father had passed it without mercy. The lawyer's office was packed, the air heavy with tension as the late billionaire's family gathered. Their faces were a mix of grief, curiosity, and greed. For years they had lived under the shadow of immense wealth, and now the moment of truth had arrived, the reading of the will. The oak desk in front of them carried a single sealed envelope, its contents capable of shattering expectations and rewriting destinies. As the lawyer cleared his throat, silence fell across the room. Every breath felt loud, every heartbeat impatient. None of them knew that the man they thought they knew so well had kept a secret that would leave them stunned. The lawyer began, "Your father, grandfather, and brother was a man of immense influence and fortune, but also a man of principles. In this document, he reveals his final wishes, and I am bound to carry them out exactly as written." A ripple of unease spread through the room. The eldest son leaned forward, convinced he was about to inherit the empire. The daughters exchanged quick glances, certain they would receive their fair share. But the letter inside the envelope did not hold what they imagined. The billionaire's voice, captured in his handwritten words, spoke through the lawyer. "To my beloved family, I leave not only my wealth, but also my truth. Money alone is meaningless without responsibility, without compassion, without sacrifice. My fortune will not pass simply to those who bear my name. Instead, it will go to those who carry the values I cherished most." Murmurs erupted, but the lawyer raised his hand for silence before continuing. The document named unexpected heirs, an old housekeeper who had served loyally for decades, a charity supporting children's education, and even a young man no one in the family recognized. Gasps filled the room as the family demanded answers. "Who is this boy?" cried the eldest daughter, her voice trembling with disbelief. The lawyer explained. The billionaire had discovered late in life that he had fathered a son outside the family marriage, a son he quietly supported but never publicly acknowledged. Now, that hidden child was to inherit a significant portion of the estate. Shock turned to anger. Accusations flew, tempers flared, but the lawyer read on. The billionaire had anticipated this. His letter warned against greed and resentment, reminding his family that true wealth was not measured in mansions or accounts, but in the legacy one leaves behind. "If any among you contest this will," the letter stated firmly, "you will forfeit your inheritance entirely." Silence fell again, heavier than before. In that moment, the family realized their empire had shifted forever. The carefully built image of unity and privilege had been shattered by one man's hidden truth. Some sat in stunned silence, others wept, while a few stared coldly at the unknown heir whose life had just been transformed. The will had done more than distribute wealth. It had exposed the fractures within a family that had long hidden behind riches. What they thought would unite them had now divided them more deeply than ever. And as the lawyer folded the papers and locked them away, one thing became clear. The billionaire's final act was not just about money. It was about legacy, justice, and a reminder that secrets never stay buried forever.